Pre-season training with our new head coach Enzo Maresca is now underway. So before we get to see the players in action, let's take a look at every first team player and see who wins and who loses under his stewardship. Let's get right into this. Here we have a standard 4-3-3, and I'm going to be basing my assessments on specifically Enzo's 3-4-3 that this will likely turn into during our spells of possession. So obviously the DM or the 6 here will move over, and usually in his system it's the right back that does this. It could be the left back, we don't know yet, we'll have to wait and see, but for now I'm going to be sticking with the right back. We'll tuck in and invert, and then obviously the 3 centre backs will shift across, so we get a left sided centre back, a right sided centre back, and then a central centre back, and it creates the box of midfield that we've kind of assumed that Enzo's going to use throughout this season. Now we can talk about which players suit this system and which simply don't. I'm going to be talking about every player that realistically has a chance to play for the first team during the season, so no Lukaku, no Malang Sarr, etc. If there's a player missing during this video, it's likely because I don't see them ever playing a game outside of maybe pre-season appearances. So let's first start with the goalkeepers. Now there's 2 options we have here because we only have 2 really senior-keeping options. Obviously I'm not going to be counting Eddie Beach, Bergstrom or Bettinelli. So we have Petrovic and we have Sanchez. Now with the goalkeepers, and this will be a theme that we kind of see throughout the team in general, but it really shows in the goalkeeping department because it is such a specific one keeper will start, one keeper won't type of position. Where a lot of the winners and losers in this team, in my opinion, it's kind of like Newton's third law. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction, so one will win, and when one wins, the other one loses. And in this case, I think that genuinely, and this is kind of painful to say because I really like Georgie, I think he is going to be a massive loser in this team, and I think that Sanchez, because of his ability on the ball, is going to be our number 1 this season, and he's going to be a massive winner from this system. Obviously, we kind of have the same situation that we had before with Kepa and Mendy, where one of the goalkeepers is really good at shot stopping. In Edouard Mendy, he was very, very good at shot stopping, but very useless with his feet. And Kepa was very good with his feet, but could not save a shot if it was anywhere in the top corner at all. So we basically had this issue where we were like, we need a keeper that can basically do both, and we still kind of have that issue with Sanchez. Sanchez is a decent enough shot stopper, but he does get beaten fairly easily. The one thing which he does have as a strength though is his passing, and that's the main reason why I think he's going to do well here, is because obviously Enzo's system requires the goalkeeper to be not only comfortable on the ball and be able to pass short, but also to be able to come into this type of position in the centre-back role and play from there. Now, I think Sanchez is perfectly capable of doing this. I think his distribution is good enough to do this. The only thing which I fear is that he's a bit shaky sometimes when under pressure, but I think that will be relieved in this system because the way that this team and Enzo's Leicester team controlled possession, the way that they controlled the game in general, they had so much possession and so much time and space on the ball that it didn't really matter, and he never really got pressured. And I think that's basically what's going to happen here. So I think Sanchez is going to get a lot of time on the ball to be able to take that extra touch and play the pass forward. If he needs to play it long, he can play it long, but I don't think he will do that. Obviously, we've seen that Sanchez's long distribution isn't the greatest, but we know that Enzo encourages short passing and to play through the lines and kind of be more purposeful with our passing and more controlled with our passing. And I think that Sanchez is obviously the better of the 2 when it comes to that. Petrovic is, I don't really want to say that Petrovic is a loser because he won't suit the team. I think that when he does play, because obviously they'll both play at some point. We have a lot of competitions in this season. We're in 5 different competitions, I believe. We're going to get rotation in the cups or in the Conference League, so we're obviously going to see him play, but for the most part Sanchez will be our number 1. I think he's the biggest winner in the goalkeeping department. So now if we come into this little graphic, I'm going to be putting Sanchez in the winners column and Petrovic in the losers column. Now we're going to be moving on to the right centre back here, and we have a lot of options in centre back in general. We've got quite a lot of options specifically for these 2 positions, the centre and the right, just because there's more right-sided centre backs than there are left-sided centre backs. But I think there are a particular set of players that will suit this position more, because of how wide it is and because it's not a central position. I feel like there's a few players that we have at centre back that are more suited to the central position and can't really play as a right-sided centre back. So the first player I'm going to be putting in here, and a player that is going to be an absolute winner if he can stay fit this season, and that's Wesley Fofana. We've seen him recovering, we've seen that he's ready for pre-season, and we've seen in the past how good Wes Fofana is, not only just in general, and ironically when he was back at Leicester, he was very, very good, but we've seen how good he can play in a 3 at the back system, because he has played here before, and he did look very decent. Obviously he's got a lot of pace, got a lot of power. Not only that, but he's a very, very solid defender, not only going forwards, but going backwards. He can be aggressive and tackle, but he can also be a player that's going to make recovery tackles and stuff like that. He's very, very suited to this position out wide, because he's a very good one-on-one defender and can definitely be able to lock up players that will be going down the wings. Now, this is a big caveat, because it's only if he can stay fit, because we don't know if he will stay fit, because obviously he's got a very bad injury record at the moment. With Poch now leaving, and the players basically not being under as much stress in training, I would imagine, hopefully the injury crisis, I'm not going to say it gets solved, but I think that it could improve. I'm not going to say that it will solve itself, but I think it could definitely improve, and hopefully that happens to Wes. The other option that I have here is Trevor Chalobah, who I think will also be a winner if he can actually stay at the club. Obviously, it's been a big thing this season and this summer window is whether Chalobah will stay or whether he will go. We know how good Trevor Chalobah is, man. We've seen it for years. And the thing which is great about Chalobah, and the reason why I think he is the biggest winner if Fofana doesn't play, is because of his utility and the fact that he can play in so many different positions. Not only because he's a fantastic player, but just that ability to be what has been referred to as a Swiss Army knife player. The fact that he can be deployed in so many different roles. He can play as a centre back, he can play out here on the right, he can play in the right of a 2, he can play on the left of a 2 if you really need him to, and he can also probably play in this inverted role if we need him to as well, though I don't think that's actually going to be where he kind of plays for the foreseeable future. I would 100%, if I was one of the members of the scouting and recruitment and that type of team, I would be keeping this guy. I would not be selling him, even though the pure profit is tempting. I think he is so important to how this team can function, and it would just be really sad to see him go without getting a fair chance, honestly. I hope that when Enzo sees him in pre-season, he goes, wow, that's a good centre-back, and he keeps him, because we don't really have many specialists, as it were, in this position. And although he's not particularly a specialist, because as I said, he can play so many different positions, I think that in right centre-back, he has been so solid for us in the past, and he can definitely do a job there as well. The final player that I've got here is actually Alfie Gilchrist, and this is kind of upsetting to me because I do like Alfie as a player, I like him as a person. I think he's going to be a really big loser in this setup because he is kind of the embodiment of how Pochettino's football used to be, and I don't think that Enzo's football is going to be the same way. And what I mean by that is that Gilchrist was a player that has a lot of passion, a lot of heart, but not a lot of technique. And we're going to discuss other players later that kind of fall into that same category. And we've seen recently that there was an interview with Caicedo, very, very recently, where he was basically saying that Poch's tactics was non-existent and that he was just doing loads of running. And going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but it kind of vindicates everything I've been saying for the last few months, in that Poch tactically was completely inept and out of his depth, but he got the players running, and that's basically, it's the effort and the drive and the passion and the aggression that kind of drove the team to do well, rather than anything else. We were not a very technical team, and a lot of our technical players were losers in that system, and all of those technical players are now going to be winners in this system under Enzo, but all of the kind of more aggressive passion type players like Alfie Gilchrist are going to be losers, and I generally don't see him getting more than like 1 or 2 appearances. I think he'll definitely get some, because obviously we've got so many competitions to play. He'll definitely play maybe in the cup, and he can play on this right-sided centre-back role, and I think this is a better position for him. He's a relatively small centre-back, so he can't really play in a 2, but he's not quick enough or technical enough to play as a pure right-back, like we kind of saw him playing under Poch. So maybe this right centre-back role kind of suits him a bit more, and maybe he can get some game time there. I don't know. Hopefully he can show how good he actually is, and maybe it was just a curse under Poch. The next player in this position is going to be a player that we're not going to actually see until halfway through the season, and that's Aaron Anselmino. Obviously, he's coming in from Argentina, but because their seasons are at different times to ours, he is going to be staying with his club until the end of that season, and then he's going to come to us. I think he will be definitely a big winner. I'm not really going to actually put him into one of the boxes because he obviously isn't going to play half the season, so we can't really make that much of a judgment. I do think he's going to play well, and obviously he can play on both sides, but his weak foot is a bit suspect at times from what I've watched, so I think he'd be more suited to play out on this wide right centre-back role rather than playing in the centre. And if we move into our columns once again, we can see that we can put Fofana in here in the winners column. I think he'll definitely be a winner under us if he can stay fit. Chalobah will go into the winners column, obviously if he doesn't get sold, and then finally Alfie Gilchrist will be going into the losers column. Now the next position is this central centre-back position, and there's one man who I think is going to absolutely thrive there this season, and that's Tosin Adarabioyo. Now, obviously he hasn't actually got a number, so I can't give him a number yet. I think he is going to be the player that starts for us the majority of the time in this central role. Obviously he can play as a right-sided centre-back, but I don't think that's where he's going to play. I think that in the grand scheme of things, in the 4 at the back, he's going to be the right centre-back, and that would shift him into this central role. Now, as a new signing, I think that he just automatically is basically a winner. We've signed him for a reason. Obviously, we've got him for a free. I think he's going to be a very good player for us. We always see these types of deals go really well for Chelsea when it's the kind of surprise deals that we're not expecting. I think he's going to be one of those. Obviously, he's very, very strong in the air, very good defender, 1v1, very aggressive, and can get up and down the pitch if needs be, if he wants to step out. And he's also a very good passer, which is going to be a big benefit under Enzo Maresca when he definitely needs to be dictating the play with the ball. The other option for this spot is going to be Benoit Badiashile, and I think that this is going to be a big resurgence season for him if he plays here, because this is actually more suited, in my opinion, to Badiashile, but I think that Tosin will obviously probably play here because he is the new signing. I think that Badiashile suits this more because obviously in the actual 4 at the back, if they're playing a 4 at the back, he would be on the left side but then would shift into this position, and I think that kind of makes the balance of the team a little bit better having a left footer here. And obviously we've seen Badiashile can play in the centre. Obviously he can play on the left, but I don't think with how this kind of system works, and with this basically being a left back for the majority of the time, I don't think that would suit him. I think he's much more suited for this middle role. We've seen how good Big Ben can be. Obviously very suspect aerially this last season, just gone surprisingly, but everything else about him, once he started getting into the kind of swing of things and he was back into the team and playing regularly, we saw his quality start to shine again, and I think that he could definitely do that, especially in a short passing system with a lot of possession. The last one I'm going to be putting in here is Axel Disasi, and the thing which is really upsetting to me is that I don't think Disasi has particularly done anything wrong, but I don't think he's going to get as much game time in this team this year, and it's nothing to do with the fact that I don't think he can play there. I just feel like that Tosin, obviously being a new signing, and Benoit Badiashile being more suited to being on the left-hand side and then coming into the middle, just suit this role more. Obviously he could play out on the right hand side, that's maybe another option for him, but I don't think with the fact that he's not very pacey that he can do that very well. Obviously we have seen him play at right back at times and get up the pitch and even score goals, but I don't think that this role particularly suits him just because he is not very pacey. But the one thing that he is very good at, and we've seen it multiple times in the last season, is his direct passing through the lines, and this is one thing which I think that will actually make him a winner in this team if he plays. So I'm not going to be putting him in the loser column, even though he's not probably going to have much game time this season, but the fact that he can just take the ball at any point and ping it up to one of our forwards or one of our midfielders or the striker when the striker drops deep, because we know that Enzo will like his striker to do that. He can definitely make a difference and be one of those players that can play incisive passes, because we're going to need them. With a lot of possession that we're going to be having, you always need those players that are going to suddenly turn the switch and flip the script on the opponents and kind of drive us forward and be that spark that's going to actually get us further up the pitch after having a long spell of possession. Disasi is one of those players that could definitely do that, and I think he's going to be a big winner as well. And now if we come into our winners and losers column, we can put all 3 of those centre-backs, Adarabioyo, Badiashile and Disasi, into the winners column. Now the final player and the final position in this back 3 is this left-sided centre-back role, or left-back/left centre-back hybrid. Now there is a few players that can play here, and the first one I want to talk about is one Levi Colwill. Now Colwill we've seen play as a left back in this Chelsea team in recent times, and he wasn't very good at it. But in this more kind of centre-backy type role, I think he's going to thrive, and I think he'll be a big winner if he's deployed here. Obviously, he can definitely play as the central centre-back if needed to, and be able to play his patented long passes all the way up the pitch from those central areas, but he can definitely still do this from this left centre-back hybrid role, and obviously now he's got the experience of playing at left back, he can definitely use that to good use, and he can obviously still play the long passes down the wings, but more often than not he's going to be tasked with just being solid defensively and passing it short into these players, and I think he can definitely do that. Obviously he's very good in the air when he gets the chance to be, and obviously without us being as disorganised as we were last season under a new set of defensive coaches, hopefully Colwill can have another really good season and show why we brought him into the first team in the first place. The next player I'm going to be putting into this role is a player that is playing very, very good at the Euros at the moment, and that is Marc Cucurella. Now, I think he's going to be such a big winner in this team under Enzo, not only because he's very, very good on the ball rather than off the ball, but because he's so suited to this left centre-back position. Not only has he played here at Brighton and at Chelsea, playing in this kind of left centre-back role, but he's also been a player that we've now seen can play as the inverted centre mid, and obviously that's going to be very valuable for us if we decide to use him there. If, for example, James gets injured and we can't invert the right back into the midfield, then Cucurella can obviously do that, and we can shift the centre backs across and adjust. And I think that's having that option and having those ability to adapt the team like that makes Cucurella just such a valuable player. Not only is he been getting really good defensively, obviously he's been doing so well at the end of the season, he's really back into his form. He's going to be a massive winner in this team, and I can just see him really locking down this position if he's not replaced by the next man that I'm going to be putting in here, and that is Renato Vega. Now, we haven't actually signed him yet, but it's very much confirmed to this point that we're going to be getting this young left back from Basel. And not only is he a left back from Basel, but he was the direct replacement for the player that I've been asking us to get for so long, Riccardo Calafiori. And there's a reason why he's done so well at Basel, and it's because he's basically the same player as Calafiori, just about a year behind in terms of experience. Obviously we're getting him for much cheaper than Calafiori would be going for, at around 17 million euros I think is his price tag, and he can play in numerous different positions. He's again one of those players that's a Swiss army knife. He's obviously very young at 20 years old, but he's got a lot of physicality about him. He can play as a left back, he can play as a left centre back, he can also invert as a defensive midfielder as well. We've seen him do that at times, and I really think that he is going to be another one of those players like Malo Gusto, and we've been crying out for a left back version of Malo Gusto for the longest time, and I think that he can be one of those players, a player that comes for a very cheap price tag from a random league that's a relatively unknown player and just absolutely smashes it at Chelsea. And I think that he can definitely hold down this role if he impresses in pre-season. Do I think that he's going to actually be the starter? Probably not. I assume he'll probably get a lot of game time in terms of the Conference League and the other cups. We obviously have so many games to play this season, so hopefully he can get some minutes in there, and maybe he will even just, as I said, like Malo Gusto, just take that position by the scruff of its neck and just cement himself as a full-time first-team player for us. The final player I'm going to be putting in this position is arguably the biggest loser in the entire team. In terms of playing his natural position, I think there is no bigger loser than Ben Chilwell. Obviously there's been rumours of him leaving, possibly to Manchester United as well recently, and his sale would genuinely be a very good thing. He's another one of those players, like I've kind of spoken about in the past, that is all passion and drive and aggression and absolutely no technique. He has no technique, and I don't want to be too harsh on him because I do really like Ben Chilwell as a person, and I do think he's been a good servant for the club, but I cannot be putting Ben Chilwell in this position over the other players that have this idea, because he just doesn't suit the role as much, right? He can't play as a left-sided centre-back, he can't play as the inverted centre-mid, he can't play as a left winger, and he can play as a left-back, but we've seen it from Chilwell that he's always been a player that is so much better going forward than going backwards, and as a pure left back he's just not good enough. He's always been better as a left wing back, and we're not going to be playing a left wing back in this system. We're going to be playing either a defensive centre back or a pure left back that's going to have to be defensive too. And obviously the other thing is that he needs to be good at short passing, and not only short passing but short incisive passing, and it's just something that Chilwell has just never been good at. He's always been the player that is better receiving the ball and getting on the end of things rather than being the player that's going to create from those areas, or whether that be up high on the pitch or down here. I just don't think he's going to be very good. Genuinely, I don't see a single position in this team where he can viably fit, and I think he's going to be the biggest loser in this entire team. And now, if we come into our winners and losers column again, we can put those players into those positions. Obviously, Colwill will be a winner, Cucurella will be a winner, Vega will be a winner, and Ben Chilwell is going into the loser column. Now let's move into the 4 in midfield, and I think this is the most important part of our team, and the bit that's going to rotate around the most as well. And it's funny in a way, because I think the outside of the team, as it were, these kind of roles are going to kind of largely stay the same, but I think it's the midfield where we might see a lot of change, and it kind of changes the way that the system plays. Obviously, let's start with this right back / centre mid role, and obviously this is going to be an inverted fullback, and for the most part we have seen from the way that Enzo sets his teams up that he likes to play a right back here. So James would be 100% the player that I would play here. He's obviously played as a defensive midfielder in the past, and he's been very good there. He won Player of the Season on loan in this position, and he can obviously play as the right back and then come inside, and I think that him playing here gives him more license to play his incisive passes up the pitch. And obviously we know he's so very good at crossing, and it might be a bit sad to see him kind of demoted into this kind of midfield role, but obviously he can get up the pitch from here if he needs to be. We saw Ricardo Pereira do that for Enzo Maresca's Leicester team, so he can definitely get up into these positions, and from here he can definitely whip deep balls into the back post and be a real nuisance for teams if he does get that high. Obviously we're going to have a lot of control of the ball in this system, we're going to have a lot of possession, and our team is going to push up very high, especially when we have to do our counter pressing, for example. So I don't think James is going to be demoted to a defensive midfielder job. I think he is going to be almost like another 8, as the right-sided centre mid kind of plays as a 10. So we can definitely see him play here. And I definitely think he's going to be a big winner if he can stay fit. That is the main caveat. Obviously, we've seen his injury record is not very good. He looks like he's on the mend, and hopefully he can stay fit for more than a few games in a row. Obviously, he's suspended for the start of the season because of the red card that he picked up at the end of last season. So we'll have to see someone else play here for the first few games, but I think he will hold down this role as a starting player for the majority of the time. Now, as for the player that could replace him in this position, obviously we spoke about Trevor Chalobah, who can definitely play here as well, so I mentioned that he might play there, but the obvious replacement is going to be Malo Gusto. Now, I think that Gusto is going to be a big loser in this team because of this. We've obviously seen him invert before, and we've seen him invert under Poch when he kind of did the dual inverting thing with Cucurella and Gusto both inverting on opposite sides depending on what side of the pitch the ball was being played on, and he can definitely play here, but it's not his forte. He is so much better as an outside fullback and getting high up the pitch into these areas out wide, and he never really had the quality on the ball to kind of play as a centre midfielder. We've never really seen it from him. Obviously he can play that way maybe, and this is probably where he'll be forced, and maybe after a few sessions of playing this in training or just being coached by Enzo Maresca, he can play here and he will probably be the replacement for this. But I think that for the majority of the time Gusto's not going to play unless we are inverting Cucurella into the midfield instead, and we're playing Gusto kind of here as this third centre back who can have the license to get forward if we're trying to be very attacking. Obviously, depending on whether we are being defensive or offensive in this team, we'll rotate these positions in the middle before, and I've had a very good conversation with someone in my comments about this topic, but I think that the strength in midfield that we have, because we have so many midfield options, gives us the license to kind of mix and match and change things depending on what opponent we are facing. For example, if we need to be more defensive, we could always play like two centre defensive mids, or if we need to be more expansive, we can obviously play more creative midfielders in these deeper roles. Gusto is one of those players that I think can definitely play as a right back if we're trying to be more offensive and actually play like a pure 4 at the back system. So, but in this kind of 3-4-3 that we kind of see from Enzo, and we likely will see, I don't think he's got much of a place. And though he will definitely play games and he'll definitely get a lot of game time, especially with all the games that we have to play and the different competitions we're in, I just think that he's not going to be able to hold down a first team position as well as he did last season. Another player that can play in this role is going to be another right back of ours, and it's the young academy player Josh Coffey Achempong. Now, this one is a bit of a weird one because I'm not really sure whether to put him in the loser column or the winner column, because we didn't really get to see much of him, but from what we did see, he can play very, very well in this team. And one position I think he would be very good in is this kind of reserved centre-back / right-back role here, out where Fofana is currently. But obviously, as a right-back, he would be the one that would invert, and I'm not sure if he could play there. Obviously, he's quite tall. He's very strong for his age. He's a very, very, very big guy for his age, and especially for a right fullback. He could definitely play here. I'm not sure if he will get many opportunities this season, but I definitely think he will get at least 1 or 2. Obviously, if he plays into the Conference League or one of the Cups competitions, I think he'll definitely get some game time this season, especially after seeing how well he performed. And obviously now he's been integrated into the first team, he'll definitely get more opportunities from that, I think. Hopefully Enzo sees him in pre-season and gives him a chance, but I think I'm going to be putting him in the loser column just because I don't know how well he can play as this inverted midfielder. If he is just deployed as a right back, like we kind of spoke about with Gusto, I think that he could definitely be a winner. And now if we come into our winners and losers column once again, I'll be putting James into the winners column very obviously, and I'll be putting the other two, Gusto and Achempong, into the losers column. The next player that we're going to be talking about here is this DM, or the 5, that plays next to the inverted fullback. Obviously this can play on either side, but for the most part we think it's going to be a left-sided player, so we'll be sticking to players that can play on this side with James on the right for now. The first player that I'm going to be talking about in this role specifically is a player that I think is going to be one of the biggest winners in this team, and that's Enzo Fernandez, because we know how good this man is as a deep-lying playmaker. Obviously, I think he's more suited to being a box-to-box player, and he can definitely do that, but in a specific way. I don't think he can be a pure potch ball running up and down the pitch like a lunatic type of 8. I think he needs to be a kind of more creative 8 that doesn't do as much defensive work but can get up the pitch and create if he needs to. But the thing about Enzo which is really good is obviously his control of the ball, and is the way that he can keep us ticking and play that 5 role and almost kind of play that Jorginho role for us, if you like. And that's kind of the similar situation that we find ourselves here in with Enzo. It's very similar to Sarri Ball, where Enzo is going to be playing that role where he can kind of make the short passes, keep the ball and kind of make possession. But obviously we've seen how good his quality is when he decides eventually to play that incisive pass forwards, and I think he's going to be instrumental to how we play in that regard, especially if, for example, like I said before, James wants to get a bit higher. Enzo can drop into the centre and kind of play the balls to him, or play the balls to one of our centre mids, or straight up to our forwards. Obviously, again, that ball down the centre to Jackson or whoever is playing at striker at the time who drops deep is going to be instrumental to this team when we need to make the man advantage in the centre here. And I think Enzo in general, we've kind of spoken about this, because of how good and technical he is on the ball, he's always going to be better in a short passing based possession side like Enzo Maresca is going to employ. And I think he's going to be such a big component of this team, and I think we're finally going to see the best of him now that we don't have to contend with that horrific injury that he had throughout 8 months of the season, and also he doesn't have to be shoved up into left forward like Poch did to him multiple times last season. The next player that I'm going to be putting in here is a player that we didn't really get to see much of last season, but I think will be an absolute winner if he is able to stay fit, and that is number 45, Romeo Lavia. Now, as I said, this is going to be more of a defensive position, and if we want to play more defensive and we need to have more solidity in this middle of the pitch, Lavia is definitely a player that can play here instead of the more creative Enzo. And obviously he can be the player that's going to be a destroyer and be more of he's the purest 6 that we have, really. He can play as a 6, he can kind of marshal this back 3, and obviously he's very good on the ball too. We've seen how good he can be on the ball. Obviously he's so young, he's got so much to give, and obviously we didn't really get to see it because of his injury, so hopefully we get to see him come into the team. And obviously, as I said, we have so many games, so he's definitely going to get game time if he's fit. I think he'll be a big winner in the centre of the park. The next player that can play here is a player that I think is going to be a bit of a loser in terms of this season, and that's Leslie Ugochukwu. And it's kind of upsetting because I think that, again, like Lavia, he is a pure 6 and he can definitely play here. I just don't think that there is much of a pathway for him in the team in general. We obviously seen rumours of him probably being loaned out to Strasbourg out in France, and I guess he's just going to be a player that should be a winner because of the position and the fact that he can play as a pure 6, but I feel like he's just going to get lost in the shuffle. We'll see, obviously, maybe Enzo picks him up in preseason and gets to see him, and he doesn't get sent out on loan, and then he can be a solid option for us. And I think that he definitely has the qualities to be a winner. I'm not saying that I don't think he's good enough for the team. I just don't think that because of how much depth we have in the midfield, I just don't think he's going to really get much of a look in terms of playing as this position, because there's going to be so many players that can play here. In fact, this is actually the position in the team that has the most options. Obviously, the other ones have been having 3 or 4. This has got 5 in my eyes. Let's move on to the 4th one of that, and that is, of course, Moises Caicedo. And this is obviously the position that he's been playing for the last 5 weeks of the season, with the inverted fullback obviously being Cucurella and Caicedo on the right side. But he can definitely play here, even though I think that his position in the system is going to be different. I don't think he will play here. He definitely can play here. And we've seen from how good Caicedo is that he can play as this defensive midfielder, but obviously he's a very good box-to-box player, and that's why I think he will be a little bit higher up in the grand scheme of things. Again, let's talk about that interview, because he's very recently just dropped those comments saying he realised that at Brighton, when he played at Brighton, it was a lot more technical, a lot more possession based, a lot more passing, and that kind of suited him. And obviously we saw when he was playing at Brighton how good he was, and we didn't really get to see Caicedo kick on and start playing really, really well until the latter stages of the season. I would say like the second half of the season, from like January onwards, I think Caicedo was absolutely superb under Poch, but for the most part he didn't really get the most out of him, and I think Enzo Maresca can get the most out of Caicedo, especially if he deploys him more of a box-to-box player. The 5th and final player that I'm going to be putting here is Andre Santos. Now, he's definitely a player that could play in this role, and though I don't think he's going to get much of a look in like Ugochukwu, and I'm going to be putting him in the loser section just because I don't think he's going to be kind of looked at as much as the other players. I think these guys are much more established. Obviously Santos has been out on loan. He had a relatively decent loan on the second half of the season to Strasbourg, but his first half of his loan at Nottingham Forest was absolutely atrocious. Maybe if he gets to play more games in pre-season, Enzo will see him and go, wow, this is a player that I can definitely use, and obviously he'd be more suited to playing as on the right side if Cucurella inverts, but he can definitely play here. He's a very good defensive midfielder, but can also get up the pitch and score goals. We've seen that before when he's playing for the youth team of Brazil. He can definitely be a utility player, and obviously again with all the games we have, he could definitely get game time. Let's see if Enzo picks him up and says, hey, you're a player I would want to use in my preseason squad, and then possibly he can go on from there. But for now, I think he's going to be a bit of a loser just because he's a bit further down in the pecking order. And now if we move back into our winners and losers box, we can put Enzo, Caicedo and Lavia all into this good box, and we can put the unfortunate duo of Santos and Ugochukwu into the losers box. Now we move on to the 2 attacking 8s or 10s in this system, and these are the really, really interesting positions in this side, and the 2 most contentious in my opinion. Obviously we have about 6 players that need to fit into these 4 roles. I'm going to start by talking about this right hand side role. Obviously this can play as a right-sided 8, or it could be a 10 role, an inside 10 role. Obviously, under Enzo Maresca at Leicester, this was usually taken up by Akgun as if they were playing a 10, because he is a 10, or Harry Winks or someone like that if they wanted to play a bit more box-to-box. Obviously, we have the option of doing both, so I'm going to discuss both in this team. The first player I'm going to be talking about here is very obvious. The player that's going to play here is our player of the season, Cole Palmer. As an inside 10, Palmer will absolutely thrive in this system and is going to be one of the biggest winners out of anyone in this team, because he's very, very good at not only being on the ball, and a possession-based side suits him because he's very good on the ball, but also the fact that he's an incisive passer from pretty much anywhere, whether that be out wide on the wing, and we'll talk about that in a little bit later, or from these central positions. Obviously him playing the ball into the box is one of his best qualities. Obviously him switching the ball over to the other side is one of his best qualities, and he is going to be so good as this inside 10 if we shift the team around to make that happen. Obviously, if he is a 10, I would make sure that this left-sided player is a bit more defensive, and I think that our starting lineup, the player that's going to play here for the most part, will be a bit more defensive, and that would allow Palmer to get a bit further up the pitch, and they kind of play as a midfield 3 with Palmer a little bit further up. But if we aren't going to do that, and we can play someone box-to-box here, we can definitely use another player that I think is going to be a massive winner here, and that's the player we already mentioned before, Moises Caicedo, and this might be his best position. We've seen when he plays for Ecuador that he is a fantastic 8, and obviously he can play in the deeper roles, but I think playing as a box-to-box player really suits Caicedo because he's got so much quality in not only the defensive phases but the offensive phases. And with this, if we are playing Caicedo here, again, this opens up the pathway for this left-sided player to be a bit more offensive. Maybe we play Nkunku here, for example. He could play there and play as the 10. Or we could play someone else who I'm going to talk about a little bit later, who obviously likes to get a forward very, very much. This, again, it just gives us more options. And it's one of the reasons why I'm so excited for this season under Maresca, because I think that our midfield can be so dynamic and just change on a dime depending on which team we are facing, what we kind of need for each team. And we can obviously be in more defensive setups, like with Caicedo being a bit more defensive, or more offensive setups, obviously with Palmer. The next player I'm going to be putting in here is another player like Palmer that is more of an inside 10, but can also play out on the wing, and that's our new signing, Omari Kellyman. Now, I've seen a lot of this kid when I've been doing my research on him for the video that I did on him a while back, and he is definitely basically just Palmer 2.0. He's a bit taller, a bit more two-footed than Palmer, admittedly. Palmer's got a wonderful left foot, but his right foot isn't as good. But Kellyman can play in a multitude of different positions, and one of those positions where I think he's very, very good in is attacking midfield. Obviously, like I spoke about with Palmer, if we are going to make this a bit more of an attacking option, Kellyman can definitely play in this inside 10 role, and we're kind of yet to see whether he's actually going to get a lot of game time or not. Obviously, we brought him in, but he is so young, so we don't know if he's even going to play in the first team. He might just be a youth player, we don't know, but I think he's good enough to be able to play in this role, and I think that especially in the Conference League, which is a competition that he does have experience in playing. He actually got an assist for Aston Villa when he played in the Conference League versus Hibernian. He can definitely play as our inside 10 if we need to rotate things around, and it's just another really good young option that we have in that position. The final player that can play here is one that, again, I've mentioned in the past, and I'm not going to be kind of talking about him too much, but it is Andre Santos. I think Andre Santos definitely can play here, again, if we need a bit of a more box-to-box player that's a bit more defensive, and we don't want to play this as an attacking mid, but more of an 8. Santos can definitely play here, though I don't think that's going to be much of... I don't think he's going to play that role the majority of the time. I think he is more suited to being a defensive midfielder. One small thing that I want to mention as well, just in concerning this whole position, because this is a very vital part of our team, I think that if we are going to be playing a more offensive player like Palmer or like Kellyman, I think that Enzo might be a player that does get sacrificed at times. Maybe we see Lavia play here, so we get a bit of more defensive solidity. We'll have to wait and see. I don't think that will happen, but that definitely can be an option if we don't want to get exposed too much with Enzo being our only defensive player in that regard. And now, if we move into the winners and losers box, obviously Palmer and Kellyman are both going to be going into the winners box. The other two players I've already spoken about and already in a box, so I'm not going to be putting those into any other boxes, but these two are definitely going to be winners this season, in my opinion. Now we are onto the very, very contentious position, and that is this left-sided 8 or left centre mid position, and I think we all know who's going to go here, we know who's going to play here, and I think I'm very excited to see him play here. And of course, that player is Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall. Now, I genuinely think that he, if not the most, is definitely in the top 2 winners in this team for this setup, because also he's used to it. He's played in this system before, he's played under Enzo Maresca before, and he's played in this left-sided 8 role. We know how good he is, not only going forward, but going backwards. He's added goals to his game. That's something that he said in his interview that he liked doing. He's adding goals into his game. And I think that as our only left-footed, left-sided centre mid, he is 100% going to start pretty much every single game. And it's funny because people that are long-time fans of the channel will know that I once complained about the balance of this team, and I wanted to keep Lewis Hall, not because I thought he was a good left-back, but also because he is actually a centre-mid by trade, and I felt that Lewis Hall could play as a box-to-box left-sided centre-mid for us. Now we finally have that in a different way. Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall obviously changes our team dramatically. If he is playing here, he not only is very offensive and can get up and score goals, like I said, but he is a very good defensive player, and it kind of shifts us if we are moving into this kind of position with Palmer playing as a 10. He can definitely be the man that's going to be in this kind of left side position, but obviously in the box midfield he will be getting up the pitch at times as well. Now, if he does play, and this is where the kind of question marks come with this midfield, if he does play, maybe we need more of a defensive player here. depends on the team that we play against. If we're playing against a hyper-aggressive, hyper-possession-based side like Manchester City, for example, like we have on the first day of the season, I'm not sure if Enzo will particularly play here, or maybe James or one of the whoever the inverted fullback will be sacrificed for someone a bit more defensive like Caicedo or Lavia, for example. But I genuinely think if anyone has no questions about being in one of the positions, it's Kieran Dewsbury-Hall in this team. I think he is the only player that really suits this role. Obviously, let's talk about other players that will and can play here, but I think he's the prime winner. I think he's genuinely going to start pretty much every game, a la Gallagher did for Pochettino. I think Kieran Dewsbury-Hall is going to be Enzo's boy in a way, and he's going to start so many games. And I briefly mentioned him there because he's basically competing with Kieran for this role, and it's Conor Gallagher. Now, Gallagher is a very interesting player here because I think that if he's not sold, obviously there's still talks about him possibly being sold. With KDH coming in, he is now more likely to be sold in my opinion, because he's literally directly taking his position in this left-sided 8/10 role. And the thing is, if Gallagher plays here, which he can definitely do, I'm not going to say that he won't get games. If he stays, he will get games, 100%. I 100% think he will get games, but the thing is, and the reason why I'm going to be putting him in the loser box is because of the thing which I've been talking about throughout this episode and throughout this whole ordeal, is that he is not a technically gifted player. His passing is not good enough to play in an Enzo Maresca team. I genuinely do not believe it, and this is really, again, an annoying thing about Gallagher, is because like we have with Chilwell, like we have with Alfie Gilchrist, he is full of passion for this club, and as a person and as a player for Chelsea, I do really enjoy him playing, and I like seeing him play and do well. Unfortunately, I just don't think he will do well in this team. I've actually got some of his passing stats up here, because a lot of the people that I interact with online will say that, oh, but Gallagher's got really good passing, he has such a good passing completion stat, and etc, etc. Now, I will put his passing stats up here, and yes, I do admit he has a very good pass completion stat, but the thing you need to understand about Conor Gallagher is that the types of passes that he plays are all very safe, very short, very unprogressive passes. He rarely ever plays the ball forward, and in a team like this where we're going to have a lot of the ball and we need players to be able to pick out that incisive passer to play through a team and play through presses, Gallagher is not that man for the job. Kieran Dewsbury-Hall, again, isn't particularly good at completing all of his passes, and I've got the stats for that as well, but the thing that he is very good at doing is, and the reason why his pass completion isn't as good as Gallagher's, is because he tries to play the ball forward more. And I think that's going to be a big part of this team, and a big part of why Gallagher just doesn't suit it. Obviously, he suited the chaotic Poch ball because he is that type of player. He's aggressive, he's very snappy into tackles, he's so good as an 8 or a 6. And I think genuinely, if he is going to play, he can play as a more defensive 8 in this left-handed role, or he could even play as one of the two in the pivot if we have like 7 injuries to all of our midfielders. He could definitely play there over some of the others. I do think there is a place for him in this team, don't get me wrong. I do think that Gallagher can play in this team, but I don't think he should be a starter. And one of the things which I've spoken about in the past about Gallagher, and I could go on and 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 on about him, but the thing which I think about him is that he is such a good impact substitution because of the energy that he brings. I think that it is, as a footballer, as a player that has played football, as a person that has played football in his life, when you get to that latter stage of the game when you're thinking, oh man, I'm mentally and physically tired, if I was a footballer and I saw Conor Gallagher coming off of the bench and I was already tired, it would break me, because you know how good Conor Gallagher is and how much energy he has, and he will never give you a second. And I think that's one of the roles that he can definitely fulfill in this team, is to be that impact sub, to just give us energy in the middle and be a disruptor if we're already winning a game, for example. I don't think he's going to be a player that comes off the bench to score goals particularly, because I don't think that's really where his kind of don't think that's where his strengths are. Obviously, like I kind of spoke about with Chilwell earlier, he's a very good player when it comes to getting on the end of the ball rather than being on the ball himself. And I think that maybe if he is going to play as a box crasher, he could definitely do that. But obviously, if he does play that way, then maybe this right-sided centre mid will have to be a bit more inventive, like Palmer is in truth. We'll have to see how this sets up, but I do think that Dewsbury-Hall will get in the team over Gallagher. But then again, as a former vice captain and also just a player that's very solidified in this team at the moment. Maybe Gallagher does get a few more games than I'm probably predicting, but I think that Enzo will probably likely use KDH a bit more than Gallagher. Another player that Enzo has connections to, and another player that I think can play here, is one Cesare Casadei. Now, I don't think he's going to get much game time this year because of the other players we have in the midfield. We have so many midfielders, it's actually kind of crazy. When I was drafting for this video, I kept forgetting players because we have so many central midfielders. I do think Casadei is going to be another player who can be an impact sub off the bench. We saw him used this way when he played for Leicester on loan. And obviously, he's a player that, again, can just arrive in the box, be a massive menace, and as I've spoken about him before, he is such an aerial threat, and he can definitely play in this role. I don't think he starts in this role, don't get me wrong. I think that he's a very good player to put on the pitch from the bench if we are chasing a game and need a goal, or if we need obviously a bit more height in the midfield, if we're getting dominated aerially in the centre of the park, he can definitely do that job. Obviously, we've seen him play as an impact sub for Enzo Maresca at Leicester, so maybe he just continues to do that. And I think, again, with more games that we're going to have this season, he's just going to have more opportunities to play, and hopefully he gets more minutes than just, you know, like 10-minute cameos off the bench every single second under Poch. The fourth player, but not the final player, that I'm going to be putting into this role as someone who can play here is someone that is always the forgotten man. And admittedly, I do want to say this, what I said when I was drafting this, I kept forgetting about players. It's a player that I admittedly forgot was even in the team when I was looking through the thing, and it's Carney Chukwuemeka. And I've made a video saying that, like, this guy gets disrespected so much, but because he's been out for so long, I genuinely forgot that we had him. And it's kind of annoying because he's got so much to give and he's got so much talent. And again, as a left-sided 10, if we want to play him in this role, then I think that the right-sided player would probably be a bit more defensive, like a Caicedo, like a Santos, for example. I think that would be the way we play if Carney is doing this. And again, Carney is another player that can come off the bench for impact, but I do think he's good enough to start. Obviously, we've seen how good he can be. It just depends on whether he actually gets to play here. Another position he could potentially play is at left wing. I don't think that's the thing that's going to happen very often for him, but we've seen how good Chukwuemeka can be, and honestly, Carney could play in this role and no one would complain. I don't think a single Chelsea fan would complain if Carney Chukwuemeka started in the left side or the right-sided centre mid roles in this team. He can definitely get some appearances, and again, with all the games we have, I hope he gets a good amount of minutes. Hopefully he stays injury free, because that's the main thing that we have worries about Chukwuemeka, is the fact that he is injury prone. He's another one of those injury prone players that we have, so hopefully he can keep on top of those injuries and get a good substantial amount of games this year. The final player I'm going to be putting into this position is a player that I don't think will play here for the majority of the time, but he's definitely someone that can play here. Of course, it's going to be number 18, Christopher Nkunku. Now, Nkunku is a player that can play as a 10 again in this role. If we want to play the right-sided 10, then the right-sided player would probably be a bit more defensive, and Palmer would likely go out to right wing. I should have said that before, that I think Palmer, I don't think Palmer's ever going to get displaced in this team. I think it's more of a situation of if we need to play a right-sided 8, Palmer would go out to the wing. But Nkunku's another one. Obviously, this is a very attacking lineup with Palmer and Nkunku as these two players here. So if we do want to do that and we are chasing a game, we need to get goals. Or if we're just playing a lesser team, like, for example, a newly promoted side from the Championship, or one of those kind of relegation battle teams, we can definitely put both of these two on and then try and search for a lot of goals. And Nkunku could definitely play there if that is the case. I think that he could definitely play as a left-sided 10. Obviously, cutting in onto his right foot from those positions is a very good position for him, though I don't think it's the position he's actually going to play this season. I think there's a couple of other positions that suit him more, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. Once again, we're back with the winners and losers, and of course I'm going to be putting KDH, or Kieran Dewsbury-Hall, into the winners column, along with Casadei and Chukwuemeka. I'm not going to be putting Nkunku in here because I'm going to talk about him a little bit later in a more familiar position for him, and then I'm going to be putting Conor Gallagher, of course, into the losers column. The next position that we're going to be taking a look at is right wing, and obviously we've seen from Enzo Maresca how he likes his wingers to operate. They need to be good in 1v1 scenarios. They're going to be need to be good when they're out wide, because these two are going to be pushed out wide with the two central players taking the central area. These guys are going to be wide and not going to have the ability to kind of cut inside as much. And the reason why I kind of talk about that beforehand, and the reason why I want to make that distinction, is because the player that I'm going to be putting in here first is someone who I think is genuinely the biggest winner in this entire team, and he might actually be on the thumbnail. I'm not sure, because I'm doing the ABC testing thing, so you might have seen a different thumbnail, but the thumbnail, one of the thumbnails has him on here, and of course that is Noni Madueke. Now, I genuinely think, and I said it just then, I think he is going to be the biggest winner out of our entire team, because he suits this position to a T. Not only is he fantastic 1v1, and that's basically the best thing that he has in his locker, is his ability to beat 1v1, but he's very good at playing out wide for a winger that is also left-footed. Now, usually left-footed wingers, like we see from a lot of the wingers in the Euros, for example, like Gulo, we've seen him do this. A lot of left-footed wingers like to cut inside and go this way, and that's not going to really work in this system. And the thing which is great about Madueke is the fact that he can go both ways. Now, I've spoken about this in the past. He loves, despite being left-footed, going around the outside. Now, he needs to be able to do this, be able to get into these positions high up the pitch, and then pass the ball into scenarios where, for example, an advancing centre mid can get on the end of the ball, or the striker can get on the ball and create opportunities that way. And I think that he is the prime player to be able to do this, and I think that given the first team opportunities, I think that he's going to play here and be absolutely wonderful under Maresca, and he's going to basically do the exact same thing that the wingers at Leicester did, and they had very productive seasons with Fatawu and Mafididi. I think they're both very similar players to Madueke in the regard of they are both very good at taking on their men, getting past their men, and once they're past their men, usually they provide a decent outball. Now, Madueke does need to improve on his end product a little bit, and obviously we've seen how hard he works in training, and we've seen how he's been working, obviously because he's not in the England setup, we've seen how hard he's been working on in the off-season, and I genuinely believe that if he gets a substantial amount of game time, I think that he's going to be one of the best players in this side because of how perfect he is for the right wing position. Obviously, the big caveat here is that he has to get into this position when Palmer's not here, because obviously Palmer is the second player that can play here. I'll keep him here just for the structure's sake, but obviously we'll talk about Palmer here now. Palmer obviously is going to be our right winger for the majority of the season if we decide to play with another box-to-box player in this right-sided role. If Palmer is playing in this inside 10, then Madueke has every single right to be the first name on the team sheet in this position, and I genuinely think that he could be a starter if we want to be really offensive. I think that if we want to just absolutely dominate teams and we know we're going to have a lot of possession in the game, we don't need as many defenders back, we can play a hyper-aggressive team with Madueke and Palmer both on this side. And obviously we saw from the 3-2-5 that Poch started doing at the end of the season that these two can play really well together in these two positions. We saw it, we've seen it, and we saw how productive it can be, and I think that it's just another example of the depth that we have and the ability to change how our team functions, because we have not only Palmer, who is a very underrated 1v1 winger. I do want to say that. I think that people underestimate how good he is as a 1v1 winger. A lot of people have kind of had questions about whether Palmer can actually play in this position because he doesn't really take players on as much, but I think that these two can, either one of these two can play here and we can be very productive. But I would love to see, if we are going to go hyper aggressive and give Madueke the chance to just be a first team starter, because he's never ever been a pure starter. He never really had the opportunity to just show what he can do, because we know he's got talent. We've seen it. We know how good and how talented he is. For example, that goal that he scored against Leicester in the FA Cup was an absolute screamer, and he can definitely produce loads of goals and assists for us if he is given the opportunity to. And obviously with, again, I've mentioned it so many times in this video, but like, if he gets to start every single game in the Conference League, for example, he's just going to rack up goal contributions. And I genuinely am so excited to see him play, especially if he gets to play alongside Palmer. Another player that can play here is someone that I've spoken about previously, and that's Amari Kellyman. Another player that can play here is a player that I've spoken about previously, and again, that's Amari Kellyman. He can play on the right wing. I've said it before. He can play pretty much anywhere across the front line. Kellyman can definitely be our third choice or second choice right winger in this position. And yeah, as I spoke about earlier, he's very good in terms of being able to produce things. Again, he's very similar to Palmer in terms of playstyle, so maybe he doesn't get a look in as much if Palmer is available to play, but obviously if we are rotating players, or we need him for the Conference League, for example, he could definitely play at right wing if needs be. The fourth and final player I'm going to be putting here is a player that I'm not sure if he's actually going to get much of an appearance, and I know I started off this video by saying I'm not going to be putting in players that I don't think will get appearances. It's Angelo Gabriel. Now, I'm not sure if he will actually play because he has to obviously impress in preseason. I assume he's returned from his loan, and he will have to try and impress in preseason and maybe gets an opportunity. But I just don't think that 4 right wingers is kind of the way we want to go about things. I think he will be loaned out again. Maybe, just maybe, he'll see him do well in preseason and maybe gets an opportunity here. But I do think he's probably going to get loaned out. If he isn't loaned out, I definitely think he will definitely get some games. Not very many, but he will definitely get the opportunity to play at some point, whether that's just as a substitution or as a starter in one of the weaker competitions. And now we're back to the winners and losers, and obviously there's going to be one in each box. Madueke is of course going into the winners box, and I'm going to be putting Angelo Gabriel into the losers box, even though I don't think he's going to actually play that much. The penultimate position is this left wing position, and obviously we've spoken about the right wing position, and a lot of what I said about the right wing position is going to apply here too. And I think this is genuinely the most simple position out of the entire club that we have, because there's only really 2, arguably 3 players that can kind of play here. The first one of which is going to be Raheem Sterling, and I'm kind of on the fence of whether I want to call this a winner or a loser, because Raheem Sterling, we know obviously the style will suit him because he is decent at 1v1 wing play. I say decent because I don't think he's very good at it particularly, but it is something that he can do at times. We have seen his ability to dribble past players, but the stats suggest that he doesn't have a very good successful take-on rate. I don't think that he particularly will get a starting place, and I think that's kind of why I want to put him in the losers kind of column, is because I don't think that he's going to get in the team, especially if we bring in another left winger. Now, we are very much in for getting another left winger, or for example a more right-footed winger is kind of what we've kind of been discussing. And if we do bring in a third winger in this position, I just don't see Sterling getting a place in the team. Obviously we saw when Mudryk was now starting for us that Sterling didn't really get a look in at the end of the season, and I think that Mudryk is the player that is going to basically take this left wing spot, and I think that Mudryk is the player that's going to kind of play in this left wing spot for the foreseeable future. And so I'm going to be putting him here too, because I think that, again, I think that if we are focusing on good 1v1 skills, good wing play and incisive passing, those are his main strengths, Mudryk. Obviously we know that he's raw and he needs to improve on his final ball, but the thing that he is very, very good at is incisive passing. We've seen how good his vision is, especially we've kind of seen how well he played for Ukraine. He was very unfortunate for Ukraine to kind of go out. They got very, very battered by Romania in the first game, to many people's surprises, but he played well in every single game that they did play. And I feel like he can continue that momentum into the season, and if he does get the opportunity to play, I think that he is going to be another one of those players like Madueke that kind of thrives. Though I do think that if we do bring in a new left winger, and for example I think the main one that we're kind of looking at, and I think the most likely one, is Crescencio Somerville, I think that they will play ahead of him and he will be the rotation option, and that's kind of why I've put Sterling as a loser, because I think he's going to be the third choice in that regard. The other player that could play here is Tyreek George. Again, he's a youth player, so I don't think he's going to get many opportunities to play, but I just wanted to talk about him a little bit. I haven't actually put him on here because, again, I don't think he's actually going to play, but he's definitely an option here. The other option, and the main one that I think is actually kind of more solidified here, is Christopher Nkunku. We spoke about him before playing in the left-sided 10 role, but he can definitely play at left wing too, and I don't think he would play more actually as a pure winger, and maybe that's the reason why I think he's a little bit less likely to play here, because he's not very good 1v1. He is more of a creative player rather than a dribbler, and he's a very good finisher and a very good passer of the ball, but he's not very good in the wide areas particularly. But he can definitely play here, and obviously with Jackson playing as the striker, obviously those two can swap around, and Jackson is a player that can definitely play on the left wing, we know that. So if those two swap around, then maybe we see that. But apart from that, I think Nkunku is definitely an option here, but I think for the most part it's going to be Mudryk playing here if we don't bring anyone in, and if we do bring someone in, it will be them, whoever it is. So back to the winners and losers board, and again we're going to be putting Mudryk into the winners column, and we're going to be putting Raheem Sterling into the losers column. And like I said earlier, it's kind of one goes in, one goes out, and I think Sterling is going to be one that goes out in this regard. Now, the final position is this striker position, and I want to say, I'm not going to call this a striker position per se, I'm going to say the centre forwards position, because we know how the striker position or the centre forward position will operate. We know that they're going to drop deep a lot of the time if we need to supplement the midfield, and the reason why I kind of make that distinction is because the player that will be our starting striker is Nicholas Jackson, and I think that he is absolutely perfect for this role. I think he is the most disrespected striker in the entire Premier League, because he has come in on his first ever Premier League season, outscored Didier Drogba in his first ever season, and has been one of the best players in general, not as a footballer, in the team. And he's just kind of gone under the radar because of the amount of chances that he misses. But the thing which I want to make the distinction with Jackson, and the reason why I think that he's going to really push on and score a lot of goals this season as well, is the fact that he gets involved in every single game. And the reason why he misses so many chances, in my mind, and people don't really understand this and realise this, is because he gets into the positions to score goals more often than not. Obviously, it would be more of an issue for me if he kept missing chances, if he only got 1 or 2 chances a game, but he doesn't. He gets like 7 or 8 chances per game because he's always involved in the play. And obviously, in this possession-based side, he's probably not going to get the opportunity to kind of run in behind as much, and he's going to kind of have to do the thing which we've seen him do all season, which is drop deep, link up with his teammates, be able to supplement the ball, play it around the corner for our wingers, and then let the wingers be the ones to challenge their opposite men, and obviously then he can arrive into the box and score goals. And I think that after he's got that whole season behind him, and now he's going to get that confidence because he has got a full season behind him, I think he's really going to push on and be an excellent striker for us. If we bring in a new striker, obviously there's been talks of Jonathan David coming in. Maybe he gets replaced. I don't think he will, though. I think that he will hold his own. I think Maresca will like Jackson because of the way that he holds up the ball and the way that he can drop deep and act almost like a false 9. And I think that's part of the reason why I want to call this a centre forwards position, because I think that he will play for the majority like a false 9 and not as a pure 9 or a pure striker. Likewise, I think the other player that will play here for the majority of the time is someone that I've mentioned 2 times already in this video, and that's Christopher Nkunku. He is the best... He is the best pure false 9 type player that we can have in this team, in my opinion, because he isn't a forward. He likes to say that he's a striker. He's actually said his favourite position is striker, but what I think he kind of meant when he said that was that he prefers to play as one of the strikers. And obviously, if we were playing a formation that had 2 strikers, he would thrive, but we don't do that. I think that he can definitely play here, and again, he's a player that will be able to drop deep and supplement the midfield, because by trade he is a midfielder, as it were. He is more of a 10 than he is a 9, and I always like to refer to him as a 9.5. He's kind of a mixture of the two, and I think that really suits this position. And obviously, if we want to have a player that's more 1v1 oriented on the wings, I don't think he will suit there as much as he will suit here. And obviously we know he can score goals. The one thing that he's got is end product. He got an incredible conversion rate for us last season, despite how little games and how little minutes he played, and hopefully he can get over his injury crisis, get back into the team and start bagging goals. Again, we don't have many strikers in the team, and last season we only had Jackson as our striker because Bro obviously went out on loan. Hopefully now Nkunku and Jackson can rotate around with each other, and they can kind of take the burden off each other, but not only take the burden off each other, but kind of challenge each other to do better, and kind of that competitiveness will drive them both to be better players. The final player that I'm going to be talking about is another winner in my mind, and this is a really, really weird one because we didn't expect this to happen and it just came out of nowhere, and that's Marc Guiu, because he is definitely going to be in our first team squad and he's definitely going to have opportunities to play. I think in the Conference League, for example, here's my early bold prediction: Marc Guiu, if he gets the opportunities, will be the highest goal scorer in the Conference League this year. I guarantee it. That's my bold prediction, the only prediction I'll make for this season, because I'll get myself in trouble if I make any others. But I think Marc Guiu, obviously we've seen the potential in him, we've seen how he can play as more of an actual striker. Obviously these two are a bit more bit more link-up type strikers. I think Yu is a bit more of an actual 9, so he could be a different option there if we're trying to play that way. Obviously, I haven't seen much of him, so hopefully he can actually impress us in pre-season. I really hope he gets the opportunity to play in pre-season and show us what he can do, and then obviously if he impresses Enzo Maresca, he can get into the team and hopefully push on from there. We'll obviously have to wait and see whether we bring in a new striker. If we do, I don't think he will get as many opportunities, but for now I think he will, and I think he'll be a big winner in this side. And now for the final time, we are back to our winners and losers column, and I'm going to be putting all 3 of those guys that I just mentioned, Jackson, Nkunku and Gyu, into the winners box, because I think they all have the opportunity to impress under Enzo Maresca. Now, as an overall kind of summary of this, we can kind of see a trend here, can't we? It's the less technical players or the players that are kind of not suited to the roles that are going into the losers. But the thing which I want to point out is how many winners we have in this side now, and this is the thing which I think is going to be a massive benefit of Enzo Maresca's appointment, is the fact he's just going to get the best out of the majority of our players, and the few players that aren't going to do well, a lot of these players are in here just because I don't think they're going to play many games. It's not even that I don't think they'll suit the team, so I think there's going to be a lot of winners with this appointment, and hopefully Enzo can get the best out of our team and we can have a really good season going forward. I suppose we'll just have to wait and see whether he can do that, and obviously now that pre-season training has started, hopefully we get to see some of his ideas and we get to see the pre-season games coming up soon too. But if you can't wait until then, YouTube reckons you'll enjoy one of these 2 videos on screen in the meantime. Thank you guys so much for watching as ever, and remember, in the rain or in the dry, keep that blue flag flying high. Come on, you Blues.